Right, so recording in progress. There we go. All right, well, hello and welcome to session, 19G of SLSA. This is a pre-organized panel about reading computer-generated books, and I am the chair of this panel, and I will introduce us here, and then we'll get started shortly. This is being recorded, and yeah, should be a good time. So let me start off with, I had a quick little slideshow just kind of introducing the panel, and then we'll get started with actual presentations. So
thanks, Zach.
Share. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for being on the panel. All right, so here we are. So this is our panel. It's called Reading Computer Generated Books. I am Zach Whalen. I'll be the chair. Leah Henrickson and James Ryan and Leonardo Flores are the other panelists, and they are here as well. And yeah, this is session 19G. I thought I'd start talking a little bit about one of the quotes from our abstract, which we worked on together. We are talking here about digital literature, but we're talking about a different kind of digital literature than often is the case. Oftentimes, digital literature is literally electronic and interactive and kinetic. We're talking about something else. We're talking about print-based literature today. So I thought this idea of books being an interface is an interesting way to think about the kinds of things that books can do that are much like the technology that we use to have this conference, but in the sense that they are technological media, but they bring in different practices and aesthetics, and they have different literary genres connected to them. And that's why it's often very interesting to look at computational literature when that computational literature has a book-shaped end point that we can look at. So today we're going to be looking at 4 of those books, and I have these on slides. Of course, we'll be talking about these in our various presentations. But I think there's something pretty interesting about focusing on the book-bound digital literary artifact that we'll all be exploring in different ways. So I'll introduce the panelists and then get started with this. We'll have presentations for about 15 to 18 minutes or so. And I'll kind of keep an eye on time, but don't worry about it too much if we go over. We have 90 minutes basically to fill, so we can be a little bit flexible with that probably. And then we'll do Q&A and conversation afterward. All right, so Leah Henrickson will be talking first. She is a lecturer in digital media at the University of Leeds in the UK, and her current research is focusing on frameworks and empirical methods, investigating social and literary implications of textual technologies, commercial and community applications of digital storytelling, and social perceptions of artificial intelligence. Next up will be James Ryan, who is a visiting assistant professor of computer science at Carleton College, an educator, researcher, and practitioner in computational media, where he takes particular interest in the earliest examples of computer poetry, story generation, and the computer-generated book. He is also the proprietor of, so is it Aleator or Alligator Press? I've always been kind of unsure
the
about
latter
that.
is how I pronounce it. Yeah, it's Latinate, but no one's ever borrowed it into English, so, wait, so I can say whatever.
Which one did I say second? Alligator?
Alligator,
okay, because it kind of rhymes with aviator. That's kind of why I like that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, creator,
right.
Same formation.
Yeah, good point. So Alligator Press, which is a publisher, an archive, and rare book dealer specializing in computer-generated literature, and lots of cool stuff there. So this is my bio, which is awkwardly written in third person, but I'm an associate professor at the University of Mary Washington, where I teach digital studies and English courses, and my specific research and teaching areas cover electronic literature, game studies, creative coding, and comic studies. I've co-edited a couple of edited collections, and I've done some computer-generated books, including an Arthogram and the several houses of Brian, Spencer, Liam, Victoria, Braden, Vincent, and Alex, as well as several Twitter bots. And then finally, Leonardo Flores is the professor of English and chair of the English department at Appalachian State University, also the current president of the Electronic Literature Organization. He was a 2012 to 13 Fulbright Scholar in Digital Culture at Bergen in Norway, and was a professor in the English department at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. Is that good enough? Okay. From 1994 to 2019. His research areas are electronic literature with a focus on digital poetry and the history and strategic growth of the field. He's known for I Heart ePoetry, the ELC Volume 3, the third generation electronic literature, and the anthology of Latin and Caribbean electronic literature. For more information, you can check out his website. Okay, so that's the end of my introduction, so I will stop the share, and Leah is up first, so go ahead and take the screen whenever you're ready.
Yeah. And maybe this can be removed from the recording. Would it be ethical to just throw this link out there? Because I'm sure people on Twitter would want to join, but maybe that's not ethical because they wouldn't have registered.
They just had Carol sent an email out like not long ago that's like, share this link with your friends. And that was the schedule.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I don't know if you all would be up for that.
I can dig it. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
I'll
I
throw
just
it
sent
out.
the email to somebody a little while ago. So
Yeah, Kendra's saying do it. So
yeah, we have
Okay.
Kendra's permission.
Thanks,
we
Kendra.
have Salsa's permission.
Let's do it. All right.
Cool. I'll tag you all and you can retweet when you get a second if you want.
Yeah.
Awesome. Should
Great
I,
idea.
do you want to hold off for a minute then while James does that, or should we just start and then we'll start? I'm doing the kind of context-y presentation anyway, so.
Great.
All right, so I will just, we tested this out. And just to be clear, you can see my slide now, yeah? Cool, awesome, thank you. All right, so, just gonna, there we go. All right, so, since it's first, actually, what I'll do, timer, so I don't run completely over. Since its first publication in 1677, John Peter's artificial versifying has been the source of continued fascination. The pamphlet presents a method of producing Latin hexameter and pentameter verse using a series of tables comprising letters and blank spaces. This pamphlet has not only seen countless reprints over the centuries, but it's inspired numerous reconstruction efforts, one by our very own James Ryan. Despite artificial versifying's prolonged success, though, the context of its production, publication, distribution, and survival have gone largely unexamined. We know the who, the what, the when, the where, but we don't really know the why. So why? Good question. Let's explore. This paper considers the circumstances of artificial versifying's production and reception. It does so by mapping the various stages of the pamphlet's life cycles onto Adams and Barker's model for the study of the book, which is shown here. And while this model is somewhat limiting, it serves as a useful starting point for developing an understanding of artificial versifying's publication and subsequent reproductions. Also, given our time constraints, we're only going to look at a few of the stages today. But as we go, I'm going to argue that artificial versifying represents an early example of hype. And that's hype as defined by Gemma Milne in her 2020 Smoke and Mirrors, surrounding systematic text production. And this is hype that's especially prominent in recent discussions about OpenAI's GPT-2 and 3, for example. By considering modern text generators alongside artificial versifying, we can gain insight into the extended lineage of computer-generated texts and widespread enthusiasm for algorithmic extensions of creative practice and self-exploration. I'm hoping that the information I present here will prompt some interesting discussion in the panel's Q&A. I want to note before I start, though, that this paper represents just the early stages of this research, and I've still got a lot of work to do here. And in the panel's Q&A, I can talk more about what that work might look like. So before we start applying Adams and Barker's model, we have to first consider the author of artificial versifying. John Peter was likely born in what is now Newport, Buckinghamshire, and likely died on the 22nd of December, 1684 at the age of 44. Over 20 years, he and his wife Elizabeth had 10 children, but only 2 outlived them both. And on the title of a book he wrote called The Treatise of Lewisham in 1680, John Peter's described as a physician. It's worth noting, though, that in the 17th century, there are few standardized certifications and regulations for physicians. Physicians did generally have to take university training, but there are numerous cases of people without medical degrees calling themselves doctors. The Treatise of Lewisham, though, does seem to support what Jonathan Barry has called Restoration England's, quote, crisis in London medicine, during which humanist physicians responded to the growing commercial demand for medicines by advertising their own remedies rather than sending patients to apothecaries. So Peter also makes reference to physicians in an early printed edition of Artificial Versifying when he writes about the power of the number 9 in medical practice, which is always very reassuring. Peter also authored an almanac for the year 1678 called the Astral Gazette, which he claimed was, quote, furnished with many things not common with other almanacs. It's weird, though, because in this work, he just engages in gratuitous description of astrological occurrences and then offers some recommendations for good fishing times. The almanac ends with an advertisement for the 2nd edition of Artificial Versifying, which is, quote, sold by Joe Sims at the King's Head in Cornhill, London, and at diverse other places, which is somewhat funny as there's also an advertisement for the almanac in an early printed version of Artificial Versifying. So we're coming full circle with the advertisements. Now that we know who John Peter is, Let's move through Adams and Barker's model, beginning with the social conjuncture in its broad sense. So in 1660, King Charles was restored to the throne after 9 years of exile, following the death of Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell. This period is known as the Restoration, a time of artistic and scientific proliferation. Charles II was particularly enthusiastic about maths and science, and was a patron of numerous organizations that furthered scientific understanding. But arts were likewise prominent in this time, and Charles II made long and public efforts to restore his father's art collection, which was sold off after Charles I's execution. So we know that there's a lot of excitement for artistic novelty here, and the novelty of artificial versifying did not go unnoticed. The pamphlet's systematic method of text production has been linked to both the engine in Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels and John Clarke's Eureka verse-generating machine. As Joanna Rogers notes, one of the reasons Swift proposed his fictional text-generating engine was to satirize the very scientific and technical cultures that celebrate it. In the same article, though, Rogers appreciates artificial versifying's experimental nature, suggesting that the tables bring questions about self-reflective and creative meaning-making to the forefront of consideration. Indeed, the 17th century was a time of artistic experimentation and growth. As Rebecca Harrison writes, this is kind of a long quote from her, 17th century poets, architects, playwrights, painters, and musicians placed increasing emphasis on notions of artistic autonomy, yet expended much or even most of their creative energies on works that were profoundly shaped by the political and ritual context within which they were commissioned and executed. They promoted the status of the individual author as original creator, yet followed traditional collaborative working methods and often freely appropriated materials from their own and others' works. They increasingly sought to establish notions of fixity in textual content, yet entertained and even required modes of performance, which emphasized the skill and taste of the executor, not in delivering, again, a very long quote, and also in ornamenting, elaborating upon, and even augmenting the text in question. Furthermore, the 17th century was a time in which new patrons, audiences, and customers were continually emerging, among whom attitudes towards these same ideas varied no less than among the artistic curators themselves. I think that's about one sentence from Rebecca. So thank you, Rebecca. But the main thing that you want to take away from that is that this is a time of balancing fixity and flexibility through experimentation. So for more information about the social behaviors and tastes of the day, you may wish to consult the diaries of Samuel Pepys, who wrote extensively throughout the 1660s. And Pepys also writes about the Great Plague of 1665-66, as well as the Great Fire of London. So want to know more? Peep at Pepys. Yay. So recall that, recall that in 1666, during the Great Plague of London, London saw its Great Fire. Of particular relevance is the fact that the Stationers' Company, which was the regulatory body of the book trade at the time, had stored books and paper in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral in an effort to keep them safe from the spreading flames. When the flames reached the cathedral, though, this paper served as tinder, quickening the destruction of both the cathedral and the texts inside. Given that most of the book trade in London was based around St. Paul's, the industry was briefly brought to its knees by what would be the equivalent to about £21 million worth of damage to books, presses, and type. Nevertheless, the 17th century is often referred to as a century of pamphlet wars, which with religion and politics being debated via pamphlet. These pamphlets were fairly low cost, and various editions of artificial versifying seem to cost about 6p, which is now the equivalent to about £2.80. At the time, one pamphlet cost around or slightly less than a man's suit. So despite this massive blow to the London book trade, we're still seeing quite low cost materials spreading quite aggressively throughout the city. But books are still expensive to produce, and pamphlets are still very expensive to produce, and they require more than just the author. So who else is involved here? Oh, there we go, sorry. So the bookseller who commissioned the printing of artificial versifying, John Sims, specialized in school books, but he also co-commissioned titles like An Essay to the Restoring of Our Decayed Trade, wherein is described the smugglers, lawyers, and officers' frauds, etc. And it reads a lot like a lot of more recent Brexit tracts. It's hilarious. Nevertheless, his contemporary John Dunton apparently alluded him as liberal Sims in his memoirs, and Sims was active in business from 1641 to 1677 with his successor, Samuel Tidmarch, publishing later editions of Artificial Versifying and Peter's later Treatise of Lewisham. So I keep clicking on the wrong thing here. So you're just getting the little boxes coming up a little bit. Oh, good God. Sorry, one sec. I keep trying to move you, and it's a real problem. Hello? There we go. I don't know what's happening. Additionally, Thomas James, the guy who first printed Artificial Versifying, was a bookseller and the mathematical printer to the king from 1678 to 1711. He's a pretty big deal in the history of printing, coming from a long lineage of book people. His great-grandfather was the keeper of the Bodleian. So we're not dealing with nobodies here. This is a pamphlet that is published by some really big names, and quite a lot of money is being thrown at it. But Peter himself, but who is actually buying and reading this pamphlet? Although the pamphlet itself is explicitly marketed towards schoolboys, Peter claims in the introduction that his versifying system may allow, quote, the common fiddler to boast their advantages and triumph over the Latinist and the poet. This claim reinforces the cultural hype towards mathematics in Peter's time, although it's worth mentioning that this hype fits comfortably within the lineage of AI narratives delineated by Cave, DeHaul, and Dillon in their 2020 edited collection, AI Narratives. But Peter himself seems to anticipate some flack for this kind of hype. And he writes in one printings to the readers, dated 29th of September, 1677, quote, "It is twice 5 years and upwards since the model of this fancy was first influenced onto my brain, with the state whereof, after perfect digestion, I then did gratify some few of my friends." In that same printing, though, Peter also writes that, quote, "I am assured that the ingenuity of the latter, so those who take pleasure in the power of numbers, will acquit me of the imputation of conjuration, wherewith not only by some illiterate mechanics, but by a certain academic, I have been with this thing weakly stigmatized. Pro captu lectoris habent sua fati labelli." So roughly a book's fate depends on its reader's capacity. The fate of books depends not on the skill or worth of authors, but on the reader's will. And this note was not present in the first printing of the first edition. It was added later, maybe in response to a negative review from reviewer 2. I don't know who that one academic is. As for distribution, the pamphlet is listed in booksellers' catalogs from well after its initial publication. Additionally, one 12 November 1711 article by Richard Steele in the Popular Spectator deems Peter a virtuoso, but perhaps even more interesting is Steele's recollection that a friend of mine who's a student in astrology, meeting with this book, performed the operation by the rules there set down. He showed his verses to the next of his acquaintance who happened to understand Latin, and being informed that they described a tempest of wind, very luckily prefixed them together with the translation to an almanac he was just then printing and was supposed to have foretold the last great storm. So we've been hyping up AI for a lot longer than most people realize, and we're kind of getting some perhaps satirical interpretations of the computer generated or the artificially generated text.
Fuck.
And sorry, okay. While a third edition of Artificial Versifying from 1685 has been recorded, the pamphlet seems primarily to have been republished unofficially or in an abridged or altered version in collections like William Laybourne's 1694 Pleasure with Profit. And let's all take a moment to appreciate how Pleasures with Profit was advertised for ingenious spirits to make farther scrutiny into these and the like sublime sciences, and to divert them from following such vices as youth in this age are much too inclined. The times they have not changed. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the version of the Artificial Versifying that was reprinted in this, and you'll see it looks a lot different than the original pamphlet. We also know that by 1860, enthusiasm for artificial versifying seems to have waned, and this prompted one author to republish the tables, although because the author didn't have his own copy of Artificial Versifying, he had to recourse to my own head for their regeneration. And this author explains that my sole reason for bringing it, Artificial Versifying, before the public is to rescue so ingenious a puzzle from the undeserved oblivion in which it has hitherto reposed, and to provide innocent and at the same time useful recreation for the curious. Whether, however, it is worth the honor of reprinting or the trouble I've bestowed upon it, I leave to the readers to decide. So again, we're seeing this burden of interpretation being shifted to the reader, and that kind of idea of, well, we've hyped this up, now it's your responsibility. So why does all of this matter? And let's use these few final moments to explore the continued relevance of artificial versifying. Throughout this talk, I've highlighted some of the unique circumstances of the pamphlet's emergence, and I've also highlighted some of the similarities to kind of everyday or more modern texts. So John Peter lived in a time of great artistic and scientific exploration. We do too. John Peter lived in a world filled with fire, plague, and economic uncertainty. That one hits a bit too close to home. Also, throughout the Restoration, there was so much hype for systematization while simultaneously an obsession with novelty. Sound familiar? By critically considering artificial and versifying, we can come to better understand where computer-generated texts sit within their ancestral lineage. By also considering the various remakes of the pamphlet, which I haven't had time to get into today, we can also reflect upon alternative forms of systematization to complement and support human text production. Despite being just a small pamphlet, artificial versifying beefs up our work about computer-generated texts by literally hundreds of years. We may still be obsessed with novelty, but the concept of text generation is hardly novel. What artificial versifying really shows us is that science, literature, and the arts have long come together for fun and creativity in varying contexts. It's just up to us to make sense of those contexts. So, pro captu lectores habent sua fati labelli. A book's fate depends on its reader's capacity. Thank you, Aidan, for drawing over my slide. And back to you, Zach.
Yeah.
What's that?
I just restarted the recording, so whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right. All right, let's back up. 1899, Sweden, where we see before us the family of Oscar Carlson. And seated to his right is his daughter. Her name is Ingrid Oscar's daughter. Ingrid Oscar's daughter. So when she was born, in fact, when any baby girl was born, say around 1850, when she would have been born, that baby would be given a given name, naturally, in this case, Ingrid. And the surname would be determined by a simple scheme combining the father's given name, in this case, Oscar, with the affix Stoddard, Oscar's daughter. So that's Ingrid's surname because her father is named Oscar. Now, next to Ingrid, to her right is her husband, Lars Svensson, and behind them is their son, Sven Larsson. Now, Sven was born, say, 1875, a generation later. And when a baby boy like him was born in 1875 in Sweden, he would be attributed a given name, in this case, Sven, and then by a very similar scheme would be attributed a surname, in this case, the scheme being his father's name, Lars, plus the affix son, Lars' son. So Sven's surname is Larsson. And of course, this is a patronymic scheme. The father's given name is combined with one of these affixes, and that produces a surname. So we have Sven Larsson here in 1899. And then a decade later, let's say it's 1910, we see Sven again, and he's here with children of his own who've since been born. He's got Knut, he's got Alice, Greta, Margit, and you might wonder what their surnames are. Are they produced by a similar scheme? The answer would be no. They each have the same surname. They're each named Larsson. They're named Larsson because their father's surname is Larsson. And this is only 10 years later, but what happened in the interim is that this patronymic scheme was disposed of in favor of a hereditary scheme. Now the father's surname is passed on to the children, and they'll pass that same name on to their children, pending name changes from marriage and so forth. They'll pass on that same hereditary surname to subsequent generations, all the way down to today in Sweden. This is all because of something called the 1901 Names Ordinance, which declared that everybody in Sweden had to have a surname, first of all. So if you didn't have a surname, now you had to have a surname. And that surname had to be hereditary, meaning you had to pass it on to your offspring according to the conventions that I just outlined. So this is the Larsson family. And why are they the Larsson family? Again, it just happens to be the father, the head of the households at this time's surname himself, Larsson. So you have here a case where somebody was born at some time when there was a patronymic scheme that produced a surname. And now all of these children are carrying on this frozen patronymic. That's the name at this point when it becomes hereditary. You have this generation of children who are named after effectively their grandfather. You have a generation of children here who are named after their grandfather, and specifically their surname that they will pass on into perpetuity is derived from that grandfather's given name. And if we think about their grandfather, Lars Svensson, he's born, say, around 1850, among a generation of those grandfathers. And if you think about the kind of names that were available then, or not available, but in use in Sweden, there's not many. There's like 20 names. They're the Swedish Christian given names. And almost every boy born in Sweden around 1850 is going to receive one of these names. Generation later, they're having sons of their own. Those sons under the patronymic scheme are getting surnames derived from these given names. Then those are being frozen in time by the early 1900s, and those are being passed on. So you have like 20 names becoming like 20 surnames, and almost everybody in Sweden has one of these 20 surnames. And as you can imagine, this leads to a number of challenges. In the military in particular, there's a lot of issues because you'd call out, for instance, Anderson, or be doing something with some kind of paperwork, and everybody would answer, or everybody would apply for that particular paperwork. There was just like 20 names in use in Sweden in the early 1900s. They needed more surnames, and everybody agreed. It was a national crisis, a true national crisis in Sweden in the early 1900s, this lack of surnames. So in 1921, these men, who are linguists at Uppsala University, you can see their names here, they begin working on this problem. And they're doing this under commission of the Swedish government. And so what they do is write a book. And this is a strange book. It's called the Swedish Namnbok. And what it contains is page after page after page of Swedish surnames, new Swedish surnames that were now available for use. in an official capacity. Now, you might be wondering, where did these names come from? How do we get 15,000 names when effectively we had a pool of 20 before? And the answer is they're procedurally generated. In 1921, these names are procedurally generated, and the method is kind of structuralist, and then it becomes generative. So what they did is they looked at the personal name components that were popular in Sweden at that time among the surname pool. And so you get things like Ander, for instance, and I guess this would be Anders here. You get things like Anders, and what they thought is there's certain surnames that take a kind of personal name and they seem to combine it with natural features, things like leaf, flower, and valley, but it only happens in certain contexts. So if we break it into those parts in the structuralist manner, and then think about regenerating new names by recombining those parts, we can get cool stuff like this. And we have all sorts of new surnames that are possible. So it's basically personal name component plus these place name components that they had observed, break them apart into chunks, now make that generative. And they did that to the tune of 15,000 new surnames. Now, I want to revisit briefly this 1901 names ordinance and a couple aspects of it that are important. One is that name change in Sweden to this day, but at this time, is a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege. You have to apply to change your name, and you can only change your name if there's approval for the new name. And it's quite strict compared to, for instance, name change in the United States. Really, there's just two ways you could get a new name in Sweden in 1921. You could dispose of your old name in favor of an existing name, meaning some surname that somebody else was already using, but only if you had a legal claim to it. One example of this would be by marriage. The wife would then have a legal claim to the husband's surname. Another example would be that you figured out someone figures out who their birth father is, for instance, and now they would have legal claim to the birth father's surname and things like that. Really rare cases outside of marriage. The other kind of name that you could adopt in disposing of your old name is an entirely new surname. So where do you get an entirely new surname that the Swedish government is going to approve? Strictly from the Swedish name book. So these are 15,000 new surnames that are pre-approved for adoption on the condition that nobody else has already used it. So if I pick out a name from this book and I successfully am able to change my surname to that in 1921 or 25, nobody else can ever do that because it has to be entirely new. So you can imagine as people start taking these, because there's this desperate rush, a kind of grab, a land grab for these surnames, slowly and slowly over time, or in fact, quickly and quickly over time, the names are disappearing. And now we don't have 15,000 new surnames anymore. We're desperately in need of new surnames and everybody's wanting one. So now it's 1937. It's 20 years later about. We have another linguist, again at Uppsala, and he's going back to this with a different kind of method, which I'll explain in a second, which produces two books, one in 1939, just again called the Swedish Name Book, and then the Swedish Name Book 1940. And his innovation, which results in tons and tons of surnames, 40,000 new surnames this time, his innovation is to realize that you don't just have to do these personal names, you could also consider taking, for instance, what had been a suffix in the previous method, corresponding to something, I think this is flower, some kind of natural feature, and put that initially. So you don't have to keep the ordering of the parts as you observe them. You could actually swap them around and produce a richer kind of grammar, assuming that it made sense to do so, that it sounded Swedish, that the surnames were good. And so he's doing things like combining natural features with other natural features and producing all kinds of interesting names, which he publishes as the Swedish Name Book 1940. And then soon after, the names are all used up. And again, we need more surnames in Sweden. It's a continuing national crisis 50 years into this naming law, and everybody agrees. Enter then this trio. Names are here, two linguists on the right, and then an economist, interestingly. And what they produce is the Svensk, I wasn't going to do that, the Swedish Name Book, 1954. And this has page after page of surnames, again, procedurally generated, 35,000 this time. And their innovation was to realize that it might be okay, and of course they got permission to do this ultimately, it might be okay to pull in something like an infix from German, a combining form that is attested in German surnames that sounds kind of Swedish. And maybe even we can pull suffixes from Latin. And so they have much more chunks because they're pulling in foreign forms, which at least by mid-century was more acceptable in Sweden. And this produces all kinds of names like this one. And they have a huge book of them, 35,000 names. And then they're really quickly this time all used up. It's 1960. And again, we need more names. It's still a national crisis. So finally, they get together this huge team of 7 linguists. 3 of them I couldn't find pictures for, but you can see 4 of them here. There's 7 linguists. They have names, which I'm not showing. And they call themselves, or they're donned, the 1962 Family Name Committee. And this is a kind of dream team here. But they're up against this challenge. Last book ran out in 10 years. It's getting increasingly difficult. And so they realized that they need to do something more innovative here. And they have this idea. And they decide to raise this idea with this guy. This is the king of Sweden at the time. And they raised this notion that, hey, we need one of those electronic brains. We've heard about these mainframe, these computers. We're linguists, but we've heard about these machines that take up entire rooms. And we know Sweden has a couple. We know the Swedish government has a couple. We need to use one for this highly important project of procedurally generating new surnames for use by the populace. And everybody agrees. I mean, this is a huge problem. And the king agrees too, and he grants them computer time. And he doesn't grant them access to one computer, but in fact, 2, couple IBMs. These are IBM computers at the Statistics Sweden Machine Center, I think is what that translates to. We have a 1401, I believe the most popular mainframe of the time. We also have a 7070 for good measure. Now, one thing I don't know is who was doing the programming. No one is acknowledged in the book as having done the programming. I don't believe any of the linguists on the project could program. Not positive about that, but looking at their career afterward, it doesn't appear they got into that kind of thing. So my guess would be that there was a woman who was doing the programming in the center who's completely unacknowledged. And that's not a photo of such a woman. That's not the exact machine they used, but it's probably that, as you know, very typical case in early humanities computing. So we don't know who did the programming, but we know this team was behind the concepts. They designed the logic in the program. And it effectively works off of previous methods, but rather than just producing all these outputs, which they did, they actually produced 900,000 surnames. They found that that was too many, and so they ended up introducing a number of filtering rules. So these would be rules that would take a prospective output and then apply these rules to determine whether it was actually viable, whether it actually made sense. And this was a correction against errors in the previous books where you'd have some surnames that nobody ever adopted, and they just clearly weren't going to because they were kind of ridiculous. They were produced by this method procedurally, but then they were kind of weird and they probably should have been filtered out. So you had names that weren't going to be used. Here they wanted to not print 900,000 surnames because that's way too many, but print a smaller number of super viable ones. So they introduced filtering rules, and then they still felt like they had too many, and they manually whittled this down to a more manageable amount as far as printing into 7-inning and so forth. And that ended up producing this book that you see here. This is the Swedish Namnbok 1964. It's a computer generated book. It's straight up a computer generated book produced by those mainframe computers. It's a computer generated book in 1964. And what does it contain? Computer generated surnames, 56,000 of them. So they took all the outputs from the computer, whittled that down to 56,000, and then printed a book in 1964 containing computer generated surnames produced by these machines. Now these are, well, let's revisit the name law. These are state sanctioned, right? So by now we have a new name law. It just came out in tandem with the book. It's called the 1964 name law. It's effectively the same. Name change is a privilege, it's not a right in Sweden. To change your name to a new one, it requires state approval. There's 2 kinds of new names that will be approved. Ones that exist, meaning somebody else in Sweden has it, but you have some legal claim to it. That's rare outside of marriage. The other kind is an entirely new name that nobody in Sweden's ever used, but you need to select that from a pre-approved list, which at this time was the Swedish Namnbok 1964, this computer generated book. So these are 56,000 new Swedish surnames. They're approved by the state, they're state sanctioned, and they're computer generated. So in 1964, unless you were going to go back to an old book and pick a ridiculous name that nobody wanted, that by now was 40 years old or 10 or 20 or 30, you had to choose a computer-generated surname. The only way to select a new name in Sweden after 1964 was to select from this catalog, this physical catalog bound as a codex book, this beautiful artifact containing computer-generated surnames. It's absolutely wild. It's absolutely bonkers. You could only pick a computer-generated surname, produced by these lovely machines with this team behind it. And finally, this computer-generated book had satiated this need. We find that there's no computer-generated book. I believe there's one that came out of the 90s, but this series ends with this one. They just finally had enough surnames, and everybody agreed. The reason, I think, was the filtering. Now you had a set of viable surnames produced by these machines. They finally solved this national crisis. Great humanities computing story. As always, if somebody picks a name, nobody else can use that, right? So people are picking these computer-generated names now, which I think is so evocative, it's so interesting. And they're picking these, and ultimately, because they're not releasing new editions of the book, because this one's so successful, they end up releasing these revised editions, one in 1970, one in 75, one in 76, 80, 78, 81, 92. I actually have a copy of the 1976 one. These are incredibly scarce. So is each entry in the series, but these revised editions just aren't out there at all. A couple libraries in Sweden have one copy of, there's a few copies in total of these revised editions. So I was able to get one from 1976. Looks like this. It's massive. It's printed recto only. It's totally just like homemade, very ad hoc artifact. I love it. And if you look inside, it actually contains just crossed out, some human being went through and crossed out each surname as somebody adopted it. And every couple of years, they'd release a revised edition. This would be put out into state offices where you could show up and say, hey, I want this computer generated surname. It's, I don't know, Joostmump. I think that's what that is, Joostmump. That one's taken. And you can see in the revised edition, it's crossed out. So now you need to go back and pick a new one. The Swedish Namnbok, 1964, that's the story of it. I want to talk a little bit about it. And of course, we can do more in the panel. It's a story that begins really with this patronymic scheme that was adopted in the 18th, adopted centuries prior to the 18th century and then disposed of around the turn of 1900. And it was disposed of because of this name ordinance, which resulted in this national crisis, a shortage of surnames, which then resulted in a series of books, culminating finally in this amazing artifact, computer-generated book, Swedish Namnbok, 1964. It's a computer-generated book from 1964, and you might be wondering, was this the first computer-generated book? There's another one that came out also that year, far better known. This is The Writing Machine by Jean Bedeau, and this is a book of computer-generated poetry published in Montreal a couple months after Swedish Namnbok, so it just barely beat that one out. Which means this might be the first book of generated text. There's certainly earlier computer-generated books. I just got a copy of this, which I could show in the panel, in the Q&A rather. This is by Roberto Busa, the famous early digital humanist. It's a concordance of the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. But it's not generated text. It includes text, but it's concordance. Very famous is A Million Random Digits. This includes random digits, not a book of computer-generated text. But there's this one in 1957. Pfizer company, the drug company, produced a compendium of procedurally generated, computer-generated drug names using an IBM 650. Unfortunately, I don't think this is extant. There was 3 copies. Pfizer doesn't have an archive, from what I can tell, that you can talk to. And IBM Archives knows nothing about it. Perhaps extant in some vault. I don't think it's extant. So this might be the earliest extant example of a computer-generated book containing generated text. Briefly, I want to connect this to some later works. And I love this story. I think this book is so evocative. And where it gets really interesting for me is thinking about later computer-generated books that were clearly not functional instruments. Artist books, where the artists use the computer to produce generated text. These are generated books more along the lines of the stuff that we're interested in today, more along the lines of what you're going to be hearing about next. Artificial versifying, of course, is kind of its own thing. This is a book from 1970 by Gerald Ferguson. He's a Halifax-based artist, or was, he's since deceased. It's called The Standard Corpus of Present-Day English Usage, arranged by word length and alphabetized within word length. And if we look inside of it, I don't have a good picture, even though I have a copy, I failed to take one. What it is a listing of English words arranged by length and then arranged alphabetically within length. So it's kind of like a dictionary, but there's no definitions and the words are alphabetical. So they're, well, of course they are in a dictionary as well. It's a brilliant conceptual work. I could talk about it more, but it looks and feels and works a lot like the Swedish name book. When I open it up and see these names and just the way it's typeset, it's a lot like that. I don't think Ferguson knew about Swedish name book, but what makes them both evocative is quite similar. And if we think about this 1976 revision where the names are just crossed out, which I just love, absolutely love that. Well, Ferguson later that year in 1970 produced this broadside called Length 4. And Length 4 is a collection of Length 4 words from his standard corpus book, where if you zoom in, you can kind of see, I don't have a copy of this, that he was crossing out certain ones. And I don't know why he crossed these ones out, but it looks and feels just like this revised 1976 edition. This is clearly not an artist book, not intentionally. Swedish name book is not an artist book, but it absolutely is one. It's just as evocative as the artist books that came later, where people made use of computer generated books. I'm so interested in considering these functional apparatus, these early instruments, however they were produced, why ever they were produced, as evocative, beautiful artifacts. And I'm so happy to tell you about this one today. And I hope I didn't go over time. Thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't keeping time. It's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
that was great. Yeah, what was the year for that book? The Ferguson book? I think that's the year.
1970.
70. Okay, wow. Yeah, really
Yeah.
cool looking. I've just found some pictures of it.
Yeah,
on the
I'll
other
grab my
monitor.
copy for the Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, James. So I guess it's my turn. So I'm going to share. Oh, I have to get the right set of windows here. Should have done this, but I got distracted looking at this book. And let me figure out how to do this. Okay. Not like that. Sorry. That one. Share that one. Okay, how's that? Can everybody see my screen? All right, great. So thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks for 2 great presentations so far. This is turning out pretty well. So I'm going to be talking about a book called Energy Crisis Poems. It's about, I guess, 10 years later than the Swedish name book, but it is a book of poetry and as such is meant to be read. And so in talking about it, what I would like to do is actually read it. The title of this panel is Reading Computer Generated Books. And I wanted to talk a bit about this and sort of put it in some context, having to do with its original publication and what we can kind of infer about the intended audience that the author, RJS, had for this book. And in doing the research for this, I came across a lot of pretty interesting things. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here isn't so much like articulating a nuanced theoretical position as it is just kind of talking about some pretty interesting things that I found and that I thought I would share with you all. So let's start with the book, just a basic physical description. Interior pages are 8.5 by 11. I believe it's acid-free paper, but I didn't look that closely last time I had a copy. I had to borrow it. The cover is, I believe, 11 by 17 folded cardstock. It's kind of hard to tell because of the way that the one I got was bound, but I believe that's what it was. It includes a title page. It includes 4 poems. There are 3 drawings, and there's also a cover, an image on the cover, which I'll show you in a moment. There are at least 4 versions of this. There is the edition of 500, which is the most common version, and you can find this in several libraries, 20 or so. There's also a limited edition of 63, which is signed and numbered. And in that version, the poetry is printed on, it's green and white banded continuous computer paper, but trimmed so it can be bound into the book. And then there's also something that I'm going to call the manuscript copy, which is what an early printout of the poems before it was compiled as a book. And then there's also a reprint of it in a collection called Collateral Triage, the Lost Books of RJS, which includes Energy Crisis Poems and 2 or 3 other books by him. That was Tom Chris, I believe, who put that one together. So that's a bit about that. This is kind of what it looks like all spread out. It's a very short book. You could almost call it a pamphlet or a booklet. You have the cover image, the title image, 4 poems, and then the 3 illustrations or internal drawings as they're described on the title page. Those are by someone named Dominique. So you can view this work really as kind of a collaborative book. And when you look at kind of RJS and his poetic career up until now, he really was someone who did a lot of collaboration. The Cleveland underground publishing and small press scene was very active and very collaborative, and he was kind of at the center of that in the late 1960s. And so this is a work that kind of represents that in a way, even though it's a little bit later. So this is a book that is relatively well known. You see it a lot in chronologies of digital poetry and other kind of references. There's not a lot of scholarship about it though, and so I thought it might be useful to actually just read it because it's quite short. So I'm going to read the 4 poems that appear in the book and then talk about them. So this is the first one. These frayed lines you see bending elastically, whip and snap in this ecstatically splintered womb. Compoundings of senile enlightenment flagellate emptily, from elemental origins to computed complexities. Faceless ripples on quiet water pilot drenching ejaculations around muted flowerings of the stoned fluorescent floor. Uncoordinated, calculated gyrations find themselves hopelessly disemboweled within the random incest of this humanity. Everything is still at absolute zero. It's kind of hard to say out loud. That's the first time I've tried that. Semen stained and bleeding, and there's the only comma in the book. They linger one dead moment before falling, feeling the smirks of wanton stillness. The power covens with their obscene nobility reject ramblings of a withered spirit under the icon's shattering reflection. Odorous pinpoints of psychic excrement unnerve the frozen line within this emancipated city. Drippings of cosmic sensibility intently and intentionally dehumanize to an orgiastic veiled death. You also fit this pattern. Images of foiled remorsefulness track off into morning's infinity, into windings of galvanized time. Magnified ballless dwarfs incessantly pound their inane existence, needing no foreign catalyst. Our unfortunate crystallized patterns ricochet eternally on barred dungeon walls. Cracked mirrors laid end to end drift by their sinister orientations, wanting only stiffened flames and silence. It wasn't designed this way. These repetitiously lulled patients plunge and rhythmatically withdraw around encapsulated shackled storms. Weavings of pride and insanity become offerings of malice, sacrificing only hideously afflicted eyes. Bright beams aimed low at the sun solemnly burn and vaporize, scabbing and crusting this vacant faith. Aimless, sensitive burstings of reality stand motionless. Without sight of an innate compassion, the machine is not at fault. So those are the 4 poems, and you might have noticed as reading, there's some somewhat vivid sexual imagery in some cases. Or horrifically visceral in some cases, you might say. And also there's these interesting moments of clarity in the final line, I think, for each of these poems. The machine is not at fault. It wasn't designed this way. You also fit this pattern, and it kind of creates a nice little punctuation at the end of each of these, and clearly feels intentional, or it feels like it accomplishes something poetically. So it starts to me to raise that question of intentionality and design, which is always sort of the question with computer generated poetry. If you look at different aspects of it, it does have quite a bit of familiar poetic device going on. You have a fair amount of alliteration, a lot of repeated L sounds, or like flowerings of the fluorescent floor, and there's a lot of other L's in this stanza. Ripples, pilot, ejaculations. These are the things that are interesting there. You also have some pretty nice little enjambments, kind of constructing lines or meaning across several lines that I kind of like. And again, I don't know why this is the only comma that appears in the poetry parts of this, but it's there to kind of create that. You also get some ideas that seem to develop, or images that seem to develop across several stanzas. So in this one, you have eyes, and then there's beams sort of light, and then there's this idea of something being sensitive to sight, and so there's like burning going on, burning and vaporizing in the context of the sun seems to make sense. So these are things that I think are interesting because they seem to make sense, and yet I do think there is plenty of evidence that these were constructed or put in this particular sequence as a result of a randomized process. So it's interesting, and I think that when you look at it a little bit more closely, this is a book I've probably read a couple years ago. I think my first take on this book was that it's fairly crude in certain ways. The poetry, the imagery is kind of crude and almost sophomoric. In Chris Funkhauser's discussion of the book, he talks about it as kind of parodying a beatnik style of poetry. But as I've gotten to know RJS's style a little bit more, I see this as a bit more of a genuine expression of his pessimism and frustration and his art. I think this is kind of his style to some extent. for better or worse. But also if we think about the context, right? The title is Energy Crisis Poems. This is 1974. There is an energy crisis. Like he's got plenty of reasons to be pessimistic. And this kind of reminds me of what Leah was talking about with the time of technological change, experimentation, early 70s, the kind of dawning of the digital information economy really taking hold and shifting the way that people did work. RJ was working as a technician for Standard Oil, so he was kind of in the midst of that shift. So he had some things that were pretty relevant to his life to talk about in terms of these kind of dystopian images. So the cover is pretty striking. This is by T.L. Chris or Tom Chris. It's a silkscreen portrait. The images I wanted to talk about a little bit because they are, I think, also really evocative. And also, I found it really interesting to look at in person. They were much more evocative, I found, in person than just the scans I was able to access originally. This one's called Rainbow, and it kind of took me a while to get. Dominique is the credited artist. Her real name is Susan Tyler. And it took me a while to notice the rainbow in this image. And I think what's interesting, it's a black and white image. So James has it there. Yeah. And so James, can you hold that up again just real quick? I noticed something kind of interesting. Because what I like about this image, because there's so much black, you can really see that one has the same kind of striation at about the same place as this copy that I looked at, although they're different copies. But there's like a pretty thick line, kind of, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but kind of right around here. And this is where the ink roller on the multi-lith machine was just kind of delivering ink in a kind of inconsistent way. And that inconsistency creates that visual striation, which to me really reinforces this image of, I feel like I'm standing in a field looking across sort of a hillside and I'm seeing this rainbow coming out of the clouds. And also that cloud image you can sort of see the poem from the next page bleeding through a little bit, this is kind of producing that rain almost. It came across much more subtly and more interestingly when I saw it in person, and I could see those. The first version I saw was just a black and white scan, so all the black was just kind of the same register of black. I should have mentioned too that a lot of my information from this, I have been corresponding with RJS over email, and he told me he was very unhappy with this page. He did not like the way it looks, but I like it. This is one called Mirror. I think this is also really evocative and interesting. It's something that when we think about a blank page as a mirror, I think it's a pretty poetic idea, really. We have this image of it looking back at us or us trying to see ourselves in it. And then again, you can see the poetry from the next page kind of bleeding through there a little bit. And that poetry I'll show it on another slide actually seems to be related to the idea of mirroring in images. And this one just looks really cool with the kind of echo, just the way that the ink roller picked it up and kind of kept that sort of blank spot as it kind of rolled out that black in a kind of inconsistent way. You can see a lot more texture, a lot more you can see the process of the printing evident to the way that that's preserved there. And I think these images do kind of, they aren't called illustrations, but they do work and kind of play with the text to some extent. The idea of ricocheting to me suggests sort of the Hall of Mirrors effect. It does say cracked mirrors, and if you can look closely, you can see that phrase cracked mirrors in the mirror if you look at it on this scan. The frayed lines, this is sort of a field of some sort of crop, perhaps, fraying, the lines of wheat, maybe bending or whipping and snapping in the wind, perhaps. I don't know. That's a bit more overwrought, but that's kind of the idea. But I think the images do quite a lot with it. This is a computer printout. This is in the Kent State Special Collections Library. The librarian there sent me a photo of it. And RJ's recollection was that this is what he sent to Tom Chris to say, hey, could you make an image for my book? And so he may have also sent a similar version or perhaps the same document to Dominique. So this is what I considered the manuscript version, although I don't know for sure if it was the exact first printout, but it is exactly the same. I kind of went through each of them. They do look exactly the same, but this is the kind of continuous paper that the IBM computer would have printed it out on. But yeah, pretty cool looking artifact. I've got it on the slide so you can see it all there, but that it probably predates any of the other versions that we've got. Okay, so this is a computer generated book, and interestingly and really fascinatingly, RJS spends a lot of time in the final page of this document talking about how he produced it, but in very interestingly vague ways. So they're very precise in certain ways, but also pretty vague too. So he tells us that, talks a lot about the interval timer, talks a lot about exploding the bit. Like over email, he told me a bunch about like binary math and like how he was really getting into that. But the idea ultimately is that he says it can, the odds of producing an exact sequence that we see, the one that we see in the book, is approximately this extremely large number to 1. And I've not been able to reproduce the math that would result in that number to kind of calculate the number of parameters that might be used, but I've gotten close, so I think it's plausible. He tells us there's 34,816 bytes of input. I don't know if that's data or code or both, probably both. But he told me he wasn't interested in, like, since everything had to be input by punch card, he wasn't like spending a lot of time coding in things that wouldn't be used. So he thinks that the program was probably pretty efficient, but he couldn't find it, so he wasn't able to tell me. So in terms of trying to reverse engineer this, Charles Hartman did take a stab at it in Virtual Muse. This is on page 43, and he kind of describes, like a lot of computer-generated poetry from the 60s and 70s, a lot of it's template-based. You create a template, and then you put different things in places within that template. And he kind of derived this template from one of the stanzas. And this is a pretty reasonable guess, I think. The problem is it doesn't quite work for every stanza. So you would have to, so RJS would have had to come up with several different templates and then swap them out in different ways. And they're not in the same places within each poem. So it would have been kind of a lot of code to do that probably. So I don't think that's what he did. Because in fact, I think, well, and this is his description of what he recalled from the program. He thinks it was more like each line was composed independently, but written in such a way that they could exist together in groups of 3. And he called them subject, verb, object, but it's really more like subject, verb, prepositional phrase. And that's, I think, what he did. And he programmed each of those as lists and then put those lists in different orders and then just kind of read them out in the order of that shuffled list, if that makes sense. I think that's what he did. And to kind of experiment with that idea, I just took each of those lists and I put them into Python. And then if you just kind of run random selection on each of those, you can generate new stanzas that sound pretty good, or they sound pretty similar anyway. So bright beams aimed low at the sun find themselves hopelessly disemboweled in this ecstatically splintered womb. Weavings of pride and insanity become offerings of malice to an orgiastic veiled death. I mean, they sound familiar, right? They sound like the kinds of poems, but these are not stanzas from the book. These are just running through it to kind of prove the point. Okay, so this is from the back, the statement at the end there. IBM S370 at 158 at the data center of Standard Oil, where RJS was employed for the early 1970s. He told me he quit soon after this, but it seems that he was basically bored at work and trying to show off, and was like, hey, I know how to do poetry. So he kind of did this on a whim. And then a little after that, he acquired a multilith 85 and thought he would just go ahead and print a book with that. He had done a lot of book printing in the 60s. For certain reasons, had stepped away from that community, and when he started working for Standard Oil of Ohio, and so he kind of got back into that with this multilith 85, and printed out this book as the first kind of experiment with the new printing process with the multilith. He'd been doing mimeograph and ditto for printing before that. So another really important thing that I want to talk about is the context. I'm not going to read every poem here, but I found several other earlier poems by RJS that give us a sense of his style and kind of what he was after. Funkhauser talks about him as mimicking a beatnik style. I think RJS probably saw him, I don't know if he used this term himself, but I think others would have probably considered him a beatnik poet. I think, in fact, there's a newspaper clipping that uses that term to describe him. That is kind of the style he was writing in. D.A. Levy was a poet who's kind of the center of that creative community in Cleveland at the time, and D.A. Levy and RJS were close associates. They worked together a lot. They were in communication with other kind of beatnik or hippie communities in California, San Francisco, Canada. So they were a pretty active avant-garde and beatnik style poetry community. This is some concrete poems that RJS published in publications like the Marijuana Quarterly and I always have to look at the name to make sure I get it right, the Buddhist Third Class Junk Mail Oracle. They published several issues of that newspaper, edited by D.A. Levy. This is, it's a ditto work. This is after RJS was actually arrested for contributing to the delinquency of minors. D.A. Levy was as well. Levy was either acquitted or he didn't serve time because he committed suicide a year later. But RJS did serve a few months in jail for contributing to delinquency of minors. Also, I just really love this one. This is, I think, a great example of RJS's sense of humor. And this was in the Marijuana Quarterly, Volume 3, Number 3, which is edited by B.P. Nickel and dedicated to poet, publisher, and martyr RJS. And this was RJS's contribution to that. It's lines from a lazy concrete poet, and then it's several lines from a lazy concrete poet. I find it very funny. He also has some, like, other works that he's published that give you another more sense of his style. Things like My Brain is Bleeding Like Niagara. and the human race is almost finished. So he's got a lot of pessimism and a lot of cynicism even in his work that I think is pretty interesting. There's a photo of him with D.A. Levy on the steps of the courthouse. One of his major works as an editor was You Can Have Your Fucking City Back, which was a very large collection of D.A. Levy's work, and mostly Levy's work and some others, but it was kind of a response. The title could be read a couple of different ways. Levy and RGS had kind of been rivals when they first met, and so this was kind of their kind of inside joke between them. But it also could be said to a statement back to the city of Cleveland, which had been kind of harassing them and arresting them for delinquenting, contributing to the delinquency of minors. RJS published dozens of books, and this is one by Dominique. The story he told me with Dominique is kind of crazy. He said he first met her when he was trying to help break her out of a mental asylum, and was unsuccessful. But she handed him a stack of poetry, and he published it as this book. So he published under dozens of different imprints because he said he always wanted to change the name of the publisher to make it harder to track him down. But as you can see here, this is the newspaper clipping from the plain dealer. Two beatnik poets pleaded innocent to charges. That's RJS and D.A. Levy. So yeah, I'm running out of time, so I don't want to take any more here. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the context and the reception. I did find this is a review of the book from 1976 in a British literary magazine called Lud's Mill, issue number 13.5. This review is probably by Steve Sneyd, and an interesting set of commentary. It really kind of expands and elaborates on some of the almost self-deprecating comments at the end of the book, talking about the question of who's really in charge here, the poet or the computer program, or as the reviewer here suggests, perhaps the reader. And they end up kind of saying that it's really up to the reader, basically. So at the end, it says, a hell of a conversation piece, this set, but the poet still set the rules, so the poet still rules, okay? So, okay, that makes sense. There's also been a bit of writing, so I have a quote here from Funkhauser. There's a couple of things I would kind of, I can correct now. I think I have a bit more information about it, but I like the way he talks about how it has a kind of DIY, almost analog kind of style to it, which is pretty similar to the underground and small press publishing works that were popular in the 60s and 70s, and which RGS had been producing quite a lot of, like probably hundreds of different publications that he did. I got the impression that D.A. Levy was often the editor, and then RJS was the one like running the press and actually cranking out the copies. But they were definitely close collaborators. Also, in looking for this, I found Andy Frazee actually gave a presentation at SLA in 2018 about energy crisis poems. And a lot of what Frazee does in that is talk about the Anthropocenic context of using a oil company's computer to make this poetry and kind of thinking about where that fits into the context of time. Yeah, just to quickly wrap up here, talking about time. He uses computer time. He noticed that this took 7.65 seconds to render this many, something that could render any one of this many possible iterations. This is several quintillion times the number of milliseconds that have occurred in the universe so far since the Big Bang. So it's beyond geological time. Like, it's one of these enormous numbers. But I think mathematically, I think that might actually make sense, or something like that anyway. And so I'll just close with this quote here. This idea about time is something that I think it's interesting that RJS was already really interested in, and I find this a really thoughtful way to end this here. Is because the work is technically deterministic. It just picks an element from the timestamp to determine how to permutate the lines. He thinks that this is actually fixed in time. It's not stochastic, really. It's actually just determined by whatever time you run it. And so he says the poet need not change his vision. He need only move forward or backward in time to achieve an innovation. Before the poet even sees the poems printed, chances are they will no longer exist in his lifetime. And I just love that idea, because they definitely won't. Okay, so that's all I've got. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll stop this here. Sorry, I went a little bit over. Oh, Mark's here. Hi, Mark. All right, so next up, Leonardo Flores. So I guess, Leo, share the screen when you're ready.
You're on mute, Leo.
But you can see okay, folks?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you. Well, all right, I've given this the title Print Screen, Reading Computer Generated Writing. Let me see. All right, so let's talk about Ranjit Bhatnagar's pentametron-based work, or OOF. He created this program called Pentametron that also generates a database. This program has an aspect that has live operations, and that fed into Pentametron, a Twitter bot, a Tumblr account, and a website. All of these live operations are now shut down, by the way. It also generated a database from which some derivatives were pulled out. So part of it was the Boston Cyber Arts Gallery installation, which actually had a live operations element to it. Encomials, sonnets from Pentametron, the one of the books that we'll be discussing today, and I Got an Alligator for a Pet, NanoGenmo novel. All right. So the algorithm, which was created around 2012-13, works more or less this way. It's drawing from 10% of all tweets using Twitter's streaming API. It detects, looking at that 10%, it's detecting tweets that are 10 to 11 syllables long. And with that corpus, it detects tweets that it checks them against an online dictionary service to determine which tweets are an iambic pentameter. And basically, he checks the stress patterns for every word. And if they happen to be an iambic pentameter, it saves that tweet in a database. And it also makes a note of its rhyme pattern or its rhyme scheme. When a qualifying tweet, in other words, an iambic pentameter tweet that rhymes with the earlier tweet is detected, it retweets both rhyming tweets using the @Pentametron Twitter account. And then every 7 retweeted couplets, once it reaches 14, it publishes them together as a sonnet in both Tumblr and pentametron.com, the website. So the Pentametron Twitter bot ran from March 5, 2012 to February 25, 2019. It produced over 48,400 tweets, and you can access it on Twitter. The account has not been closed. It was also archived and published in the Electronic Literature Collection, Volume 3. And you can also search for it in the Internet Archive, and I will suggest why this is an interesting way to read it. So when you read @Pentametron or the Pentametron bot, if you followed Pentametron when it was live, its rhyming couplets would appear on your Twitter stream. That is no longer the case, right? But one of the delights of the time was you're reading about whatever it is you're reading about on Twitter, and suddenly you come across a couplet from Pentametron, and that brought surprise and delight and art to your day. So to read the couplets in isolation, right, and that's how it was experienced, and drew attention to those juxtaposed tweets. And so that poetic function of language, rhythm, rhyme, would take these tweets that were about usually completely different things and would bring them close together. And just the kind of sonic connections between them then prompted cognitive connections that would lead to delight, surprise, humor, beauty. Now, the tweets sometimes address current events, especially when there was a major event going on. Think Super Bowl games, think like I remember following this bot during the Boston bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing, and you know, really it became very topical. And these couplets become this sort of poetic distillation of Twitter's collective voice in a given moment. Now, here's an example of what this might be like, right? On September, more or less this time in 2018, another day, another lonely night, I've never witnessed such a lovely sight. And so here you have a nice little rhyming couplet, right? And they have a bit of a sense of coherence to them. And then we can sort of appreciate them different, you know, together. Now, when you read Right now, all we can do is go to the Pentametron Twitter profile page. And, you know, it's always going to display the most recent tweets and whatever's pinned up top. Its top tweets break character and you know, have authorial commentary. You can see Pentametron's reached 7 years today with 27,000 couplets done, inspired some songs, a book, see bio, yay. Thanks all for letting robots have some fun. And there's a little tweet from Ranjit. And then you can see, right, the robot stole a bowl and ran away. And then you kind of have to skip this sort of Twitter suggestions. And I've had the hiccup 7 times today. So the couplets are there, but they're interrupted by other things, right? And it's less of a, I don't know, it's less of a poetic experience than when it was live and surprising you in your Twitter stream. You can scroll down and you're going to read, but it's like, imagine just like swimming down towards the bottom of the ocean. You're not going to reach the bottom and you're going to miss out on a lot of early tweets. So it's less of an immersive experience. It's really, you know, you're just going to read whatever it was doing towards the end. And that's, you know, that's one way of experiencing it. Now, if you read it in the electronic literature collection, you have access there to a Twitter archive that went all the way to February 2016. And you can download different aspects of the work, including the Twitter archive. So, for instance, if we're reading it in the Twitter archive, just looking, you know, at when it first comes up, you can read February 2016. I'm going out tomorrow morning then. I'm lost in an empty pillow talk again. I'm so excited for the ball tonight. Que será, será, so the story goes. It ain't a secret, everybody knows. On occasion, there's a glitch where it doesn't, they don't, you know, you miss half of a rhyming couplet, but you get the idea. Now, if you read it, Pentametron in the ELC Twitter archive, however, one of the nice things you can do is, I mean, it's archiving from its launch in March 2012 to February 2016. It's searchable, so you can actually browse through it, and it invites exploration by month and year. It invites topical readings based on major events. There's no advertising, there's no embeds, though you lose the original profile picture context. And it really invites reading rhyming couplets in relation to each other. It has the potential for narrative readings of the moment. And reading top to bottom does go against the tweet chronological order. So, you know, the older thing comes below. So for instance, why these commercials making me depressed? I'd rather watch the Puppy Bowl instead. So far, the Super Bowl commercials blow. Not gonna even watch the halftime show. So for the Super Bowl, commercials suck. That nationwide commercial, what the fuck? Expect the unexpected, holy shit. Seattle lucky, that defense legit. All right. So if we read the Tumblr, so it ran from December 26, 2013 to September 6, 2015. It organizes the output in English or Shakespearean sonnet form. So we have 3 quatrains and a couplet. It presents lines chronologically from top to bottom. And it does invite these coherent readings as quatrains, couplet, sonnet. By the way, notice the kind of cone in the profile image in the Tumblr. And I think that's an apt metaphor for taking the entire, well, 10% of the Twitter stream and distilling it down into tweets. So here's an example. The Super Bowl. I didn't even watch the Super Bowl. Scott Lively is the lowest of the low. Who can distinguish darkness from the soul? New England or Seattle? Ready? Go. Officials screwing up already. Wow. Seattle lucky, that defense legit. So everybody like the Seahawks now. Expect the unexpected. Holy shit. That nationwide commercial, what the fuck? Not even gonna watch the halftime show. So for the Super Bowl, commercials suck. So far, the Super Bowl commercials blow. Why are these commercials making me depressed? The Super Bowl commercials are the best. And so, notice we have this rhyme scheme that's interweaving, it's cutting across the couplets have been interwoven so that one is in conversation with the other. It invites reading as stanzas, right, as quatrains. This poetic form creates larger units for us to apprehend and make cognitive connections. And because it's drawing tweets written around the major event, that helps with coherence. So there was a lot during the Super Bowl, there was a lot of tweets, and it was distilling tweets that were Super Bowl themed. And that helped, generate output that worked well together. But without such an event, the reader has to work harder for the poem to make sense. So, for example, now let's take a peek at pentametron.com. I went to the Wayback Machine and looked at it, right? So from March 2012 to December 2013, early December 2013, it had this live website that was constantly being generated and regenerated as Pentametron detected and tweeted. Around December 7, 2013, I'm looking at the Wayback Machine, this message came out. Pentametron.com may rise again. Please follow it on Twitter until then. Pentametron's first novel is now set. I got an alligator for a pet. And then nowadays, right, looking at it this morning, you can see this is not quite Pentametron. I mean, these are the titles of poems that he has curated, right? And so it's no longer generating, it's simply doing a series of selections. Now, here's an example from July 5, 2013, right? Notice that each line is documented, attributed, and timestamped. They're ordered by the most recent retweeted couplets. It's organized into English Shakespearean sonnet structure, but it's keeping the couplet integrity in rhyme scheme. And you'll see that non sequiturs abound, and we're going to have to really will sonnet conventions onto the poem. We really have to work hard to get a sense of a volta or the rhetorical turns that happen in a sonnet. So for instance, I'm going to do a cover of The Way, more driving than a little bit today. Might cheer her up a bit, the grouchy cow. I was in the shower like an hour. Wow. An empty mailbox is the saddest sight. Words can't explain the nerves before a fight. I should have got the watermelon one. The journey to Tunisia has begun. Why is the Mumford concert canceled? Teen Titans. Oh, no. Teen Titans was a freaking awesome show. I'm just a fucking asshole. Holy shit. Well, aren't you a little hypocrite? My other Twitter got suspended. Gay. I'm sweating like a whore in church today. And so you can see that it's really hard. It doesn't hold together, right? Conceptually, even the stanzas are tricky. It has moments of lucidity, but it's more at the level of the couplet than at the level of the stanza. And it certainly doesn't seem to have the kind of voltas that we would expect in a sonnet. Now, this poem that's in pentametron.com today, right? It wasn't published today, but it's there, right? It's a curated selection of poems. The poems follow different logics, and you can see that here. This one, for example, is made entirely with rhymes that have the same, with lines that have the same end rhyme. And the lines are drawn from the database, not necessarily a live stream. And I think there may be some thematic factors in the selection algorithm. So let's read this one. I really fancy Justin Timberlake. Another hour later, still awake. Cry me a river, Justin Timberlake. I want a little Debbie zebra cake. I want to do another Harlem Shake. Fuck, I forgot about the Harlem Shake. I absolutely love Brazilian steak. Another night, another tummy ache. I really fancy Justin Timberlake. I'd rather keep the real and lose the fake. Sweet baby Jesus, Justin Timberlake. Still haven't even started Prison Break. Still really fancy Justin Timberlake. Frank Ocean is a fucking shitty mess. 2 Justin Timberlake commercials. Yes. So notice all the repetitions, right? It's very focused. Moving on to the Boston Cyber Arts installation. This was actually presented in a gallery, and it was live and changing live. We had 4 sonnets installations and changing, right? And of course, that invites a kind of a more superficial kind of gallery reading. You're really, reading it in the moment and seeing it change. I Got an Alligator for a Pet was the NaNoGenmo novel he published in November 30, 2013, 2 hours before the end of the month. And he, got inspired and generated I Got an Alligator for a Pet, which, is a 252-page PDF with at least 50,000 words. That's the NaNoGenmo rule, right? Each sonnet is organized into a chapter, which gestures towards a narrative coherence. The title for each chapter is part of the rhyming couplet with the following or preceding one. So you can see chapter 1, the Lakers better win tomorrow, though. Snow wishes, Merry Christmas, Santa Snow, right? So that tries to kind of create some sense of flow. The rhyme scheme is very, it's interwoven. So it's not just couplets, it's quatrains and a couplet. And the coherence challenges really escalate from not only from just making each sonnet comprehensible, but also then thinking of the sonnet sequence as a narrative. So imagine a 252-page book with all these chapters. How do you wrap your brain around it in any kind of coherent way? So my suggested reading strategy is to sample it. Go in and read a sonnet here or there and move on. Now, encomiums, sonnets from Pentametron, published by Counterpath Press in 2018, it's part of the Using Electricity series. It's a short book, 64 pages long. The poems are organized into sequences of about 5-6 sonnets, each with a title given by Bhatnagar that is making a reference to the formal constraints that shaped each sonnet sequence. And the poems were selected from output by Bhatnagar, who then added punctuation. So it generated output, he chose the best ones, and then shaped the punctuation. So there's a cyborg crafting thing going on. And so these smaller conceptually framed sonnet sequences invite readers to consider them collectively. And you can see that, this piece, daughterliness, let's read it very quickly. Up craving pizza, extra cheese and wings, appreciate the little things in life. This universe and all created things. I kind of want to be an army wife. When practice hasn't even started yet, I'd rather stay inside and make a beat. I didn't get a sticker. I'm upset. First practice here in this Miami heat. Shall tremble, he descending will himself. Imperfect issue, y'all, already back. Will never be the same. I'm watching Elf again. I had a mini heart attack. Insert suspenseful music here. The same mistake again. When is the Pirates game? So, as with all the other Pentametron products or output, clotheslines abound, but enjambment is now possible, right? And part of it is Ranjit Bhatnagar's interventions and punctuation and capitalization to create moments of, coherence between lines and grammatical coherence between lines. And so instead of sampling, it's more fun to read the whole sequence. And it's the most writerly of these works. the most guided by his intelligence in many ways, though they're all to different extents guided that way. In closing, has Ranjit Bhatnagar written anything? And the answer is absolutely. He's written the code, sites, accounts, and algorithms needed to distill iambic pentameter lines from Twitter. This is what I have called elsewhere distant writing, that is, writing the code or machine that generates an intended textual output. And this is a cyborg writing practice in which human interventions are inseparable from automated algorithmic processes. From the outset of this project to its most recent iteration, we see this increased authorial interventions from Ranjit Bhatnagar, closing the distance between himself and the output. In the very early pentametron, it's just a machine, directing tweets out into Twitter and onto a website and onto Tumblr. But this final work, this final published book, is actually very carefully crafted. The algorithms are more complex, and he is really working very closely with the materials. He's also moved from a third generation ELIT practice to a first generation kind of output, which is books. Books abounded in the first generation of electronic literature, and yet here we have a book that's based on material from Twitter streams and social media, which is very third generation. And so as readers of this output, we participate in meaning making to different degrees, from surprising juxtapositions to narrative and poetic sequences. And each instantiation brings cultural and material frameworks that invite different kinds of readings. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Leah. That was awesome. Thank you. Well, that is all of our papers, and it looks like we're actually already out of time, right? I don't know. Kendra can maybe tell us if we have to vacate the Zoom room for someone else to take it. But I'm certainly glad we were able to hear each other's papers and had a couple of people show up, a couple of people that we actually wanted here to show up, as opposed to a couple of surprise guests that were a little less welcome. Kendra, do we have a few minutes to hang out, or should we wrap it up?
Probably just a couple more minutes. I have to personally go and lead another portion of the session, so
Okay.
I cannot stick around too long. So this Zoom call can't stick around too long.
Okay,
But still have some time left. Don't forget to stop the recording as well, so that the rest of it saves.
Okay, and that'll give me a link when I do that, I think.
Yep, right? It should. Well, it should save to your cloud, and then
okay.
Yeah.
Hope so. Okay, I hope that works. All right, great. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the transcript too, just to make sure.
I'm actually glad that we recorded that, because I took notes, but I feel like there's a lot that I'd like to revisit. So yeah, I'm quite
totally
with recording.
Awesome talks you through. That was great.
Yeah, and just like such fascinating different like artifacts that we were able to talk about. I mean, it's just from thinking about a tweet as an artifact that gets contextualized in so many different ways. There's so many different archival strategies, including finally print. Like that's such a fascinating process to go from the completely ephemeral world of Twitter to the, quasi-permanent state of the book, right? And then just the long range of history that we were able to talk about here was just like, I think, really cool. And yeah, I thought I was really interested in the way that you're talking about like technological advancement and like the idea of the reader being like having to do the work. I forget the exact Latin quote that you quoted from. That's kind of how Leo was ending his talk about pentametron. So things kind of came together nicely on that, I think.
Yeah, I was a bit worried about mine because it was really book history focused, and I think it was a bit too dense. I was like, as I was reading it, I was like, oh God, I've done the thing where I just put everything I learned. But I actually, I think what really ties our talks together nicely is this idea of like human curation and human interpretation of these works. And James, I was absolutely captivated by yours, especially because it's just like, you just recontextualized it so well. And Zach, I felt like you did like the first three works for me were essentially recontextualization works. And then Leo, you kind of shifted the focus a little bit into more, reader interpretation and textual criticism. And I really liked how they all fit together. But there was that shift as well. This was a really good panel. I'm not surprised, but I'm also just like, this is great.
I really
Yeah.
loved how all our talks were so grounded. They're so like material, so like
Yeah.
let's look at copies, let's look closely.
Yeah.
Here's these
Yeah.
objects, right? And so I think Hales would be proud, with the sort of media
helps.
specific analysis and all that kind of thing.
But it helps that James single-handedly owns all of these objects as well.
Yeah.
I wish I owned artificial versifying. I want to see a copy. You probably can, Leah. They're held at.
So I wanted to see if I could go to London to like see some of the copies, and then to go to the Stationers Company registers and actually look at the registers from 1600s. And I plan to do that. That is definitely what's going to happen. But with COVID, they've all been shut. Like,
yeah. I want to see photos so bad. Even if you can't share them, please share them with me. And I shouldn't say that on recording. But
I'll just live stream it for you. I'll just be like, okay, James, we're live streaming in.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't know, like, especially about the, I mean, I know about pentametron, but I thought it was really interesting that because there was a lot of context. Like I wrote a little bit about pentametron a long time ago, but I didn't realize, and Zach was putting this in the chat, I didn't realize that there was that human curation of tweets after the Boston bombing. And I didn't realize that like he was, I knew he did the curation, but it kind of reminded me of, I forget his name now, Jave's recent work about where he kind of very consciously curated his computer generated poetry, whereas I feel like Nagar does that a lot more subtly. Yeah. Based on what you were saying.
Yeah.
So just so much to think about.
Yeah. No, I have to say, James, I put it in the chat, but just putting together the proposal for this panel and just the Swedish Namnbok and what your little blurb inspired me to create a Twitter bot on forgotten saints. I generated 1,000 new names for both male and female saints, so 2,000 new names, and then generating the lives of saints and their martyrdom and their deeds and the whole thing. And so it's a lot of fun. It's in Spanish.
I pulled it up in a new tab, but sorry.
But check it out if you get the chance. It's kind of fun, and the translation works pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. So Kendra's telling us we need to wrap up.
Yes,
we also have Andrew Ferguson here. I don't know if Andrew, if you have any questions or comments or anything. Since you are our guest, if you have a quick word to get in before we close it off, you can. But if not, that's fine too. I'm glad you were able to join us.
I'll show a few things I didn't show yet, just for fun. Well, in our last couple seconds, here's the limited edition of Energy Crisis poems with.
I wanted to see that. Yeah.
So it's actually pasted in. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, okay.
So that's
we literally
the top
just like
of the
glued it in
fanfold.
there. Yeah.
Yep. It's cut out and glued in.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of his books have a real DIY, like foldy paper kind of look to them. I think that's awesome.
Which I love. I love it here. And then here's the Swedish Namnbok. I just love opening this up. It's just like, I love it. Yeah.
Just like solid columns, kind of like the random numbers, like the Million Random Digits book. It's just like all this like solid textuality there.
Which is beautiful. Right. Yeah, beautifully typeset.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm going to go and stop the recording so we don't cut it off too quickly. Let me make sure I do that. Are you sure?
Zach,